Hi everyone! I made a new series of videos revolving around oral history. More videos will keep coming as I collect more stories and interview more remarkable people. But just in case it isn't quite clear what oral history is, I make this video as an introduction with a little more explanation. So, oral history is both a method and a product. I studied history, and back then I did a really interesting minor in journalism. And one of the subjects they offered at university was oral history. And it turned out to be super useful for both disciplines in terms of research skills. So I am glad that I took this subject. Now, what is oral history? The definition is threefold, actually. First of all, it refers to an activity, namely one person telling a story about the past and another person listening to this. So it's oral communication between people that is based on things that have already happened. Telling stories and sharing memories and also listening to it, rather than writing it down and reading it. Secondly, it's a scientific research method. It's a way of gathering information and finding sources and evidence. For example, if you investigate a subject for which there is little information to be found in written documents or books, you might want to resort to interviews and conversations in order to find the answers to your questions. As such, I would say that it is mostly used in the disciplines of history, archaeology, anthropology, journalism, and law. Lastly, oral histories can also be considered the products of the activities I just described. An oral history is therefore also the product of an interview, the product of a conversation, and the product of capturing these personal stories. If you set out to interview someone, you would typically record the conversation, either with a video camera or a microphone, or by writing down what the person is saying. The recording and the notes you'll have at the end form the product of your research. Now, you can leave the recording as it is, or you can use the conversation as a source of information. Then you would probably construct a broader history of a certain topic and include the oral history as evidence or as an example. In sum, oral history can be an activity, a scientific research method, and a product. So why is oral history useful and important? I already hinted at this, but oral histories can be treated as source material on their own. As such, it can be used in any research. Especially historians can use it as their main source, as an additional source, to back up a statement with extra examples, or lastly, as an alternative source that could contradict other known sources about the topic. You can imagine that the written history of a certain event may be heavily colored by those in power or by those who recorded it. If that is the case, conducting oral histories with those who never got a chance to articulate their side of the history can be so incredibly valuable. Adding oral histories will certainly make the historical record more complete and more inclusive. Having said all this, we also need to be aware of the limitations of oral histories. Because, as with any interview or communication between people, their own personal frames of reference influence what is being said. Your frame of reference is based on your ideas, your values, all of the things that you find interesting and important, the place that you live in and grew up in, your education, your financial situation, your favorite things, the media and social media that you use, and also on your relationships with your family and friends. All of this determines your opinion about things, so naturally, all of these things play a role in the background of any interview. Doesn't matter who is talking, or when, or where on earth, it will always play a role. A simple example to clarify this is me asking a person from Sweden about their opinion on how well their government takes care of the Swedish people. If I would ask the same question to a person from China, how well is the Chinese government taking care of the Chinese people, in your opinion? The answer that I'll get will be completely different, because daily life in Sweden is totally different from daily life in China, even though the question remains the same. So the background of a person, in other words, their frame of reference, will always influence their ideas and opinions. Not to mention the fact that not everyone enjoys total freedom of speech. People living under dictatorships or strict government control may not be able to speak as freely as people living in a democracy. So it's wise to keep this in mind as well. Furthermore, the person asking the questions will always influence the conversation. The questions will surely direct the interviewee in a certain direction. Let's use the same example again. If I ask the person from Sweden how they feel about their government, this person might want to talk about the latest elections to back up their own statements. Yet, if my next question would be about child support, our conversation will be about child support and not about the elections at all. So my influence on what is being said is actually quite big. One last thing about the limitations of oral history is that the human mind is not flawless. Research shows that our memories of bad and horrible experiences are more accurate and more vivid than our memories of nice and pleasant experiences. This has to do with the survival mode that the body could be in. The human body works harder and for a short time even better under stress. I am no expert on this, but because of this, our bad memories really linger in our minds, more so than pleasant memories. In line with this, our stories about past experiences will always be colored. Nobody is objective. Again, because of our own frames of reference, we are all subjective storytellers. And in addition to this, when we recall what happened in the past, it is very likely that we will exaggerate both the good things and the bad things. It is like telling a story to our friends. I think we all sometimes exaggerate things a little to make the story funnier or scarier or more entertaining and impressive. This is very human, and it is not the same as lying. It is simply adjusting our telling to the reaction of our audience. Yet, despite the limitations, oral histories fascinate me so much. It's like you ask someone to share a personal story in their own words. And we can learn so much from it, especially if these stories are not included in the general history books or in the general discourse of society. There is a slight distinction between oral histories and oral traditions, which you can see right here. However, in this series, I do not distinguish between the two. It is my intention to ask people about their own culture and their own experiences. Sometimes the product will be a personal and unique oral history. Other times, the product will be an oral tradition of a larger community. Either way, the stories will be exciting and entertaining. First up are two tellings from the Gambia in West Africa, which I hope you will enjoy.